Hey everybody, how's it going? We are live. Dan, Janice here. Janice Ying, awesome physical therapist and musician, caters to the music industry. And we got a fun topic. Not that injuries are fun. Well, I was kind of having fun when I got my injury. We'll talk about that. But we're going to talk about recovery. If you're a musician, the whole head trip of having a major injury, even a minor one that lays you up for a little while, not just if you're a drummer, because we do talk about things that other instruments, other players can acquire from playing other instruments, right, Janice? Like tendonitis,
arthritis,
repetitive motion,
carpal bunch of stuff.
Yeah. So let's dig into that. This is the month that 43 years ago. In fact, I have a picture. This happened. Oh, just to look at it. That's me in a full cast because I had broken my wrist in half. That was me when I was 8,
love that picture.
Believe it or not. And the guy next to me, Mike Blanco, set up my equipment from the time we were 15 for like 20 years or something. And we were on a backpacking trip is when this picture was taken. But what happened was when I was younger, I used to race motorcycles. And about 3 weeks before this picture was taken on a backpacking trip, we were obviously you see buildings in the background, but this is before we went up the road into the high Sierras. What happened was had finished racing motorcycles and I was riding back to our camp. It was out in the desert. I was going like 5 or 10 miles an hour and the back wheel washed out in some soft dirt. And I put my hands out, big mistake, to break my fall. And this bone, I forgot what it's called, Janice, at your wrist.
Radius.
That broke literally in half this way. It stayed together, but it broke in half. And went to the doctor the next day because I didn't get home till late that night. And the doctor basically said, after x-rays, he was kind of an eccentric guy, Dr. Lubin. Dr. Lubin said, "You'll never write." He said, "You're right-handed, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "You'll never write with your right hand. You'll never play drums again. You might not even be able to wipe your butt with your right hand again." And my dad was with me and both our minds just wandered to like, what if I can't play? Because I was already playing professionally at that point and getting paid. It was really scary. But I had this backpacking trip planned for like 2 months with Mike and some other friends. And I said, well, let me ask you something. Now that I have a big cast on, I'm going on a backpack trip in the high Sierras, all this. Can I still do that? He said, just don't fall off a cliff and land on the same wrist. So
great advice.
Yeah. Great advice. And the funny thing is, as soon as we got to a trailhead, there were 6 of us or 5 of us in each car, 2 cars. We all got out. We got no less than 40 feet from the cars and it started hailing like marbles. And my cat subsequently got wet and loose. And we were going to be gone like 9 days or something. And that was the first day. And I said, don't even worry about it. Let's keep going. So by the time I got home, this thing was falling apart. And I had another full cast for 2 weeks or so. And then for another 7 weeks, I had a half cast. Off and on. Sure. Kept checking. But the point is let's talk about that, Janice, as a musician, recovering from a major injury. There's the psychological and emotional part, but the physical part, I'm guessing that one of the most important things is for us to not rush back to where we left off, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, there's so many different kinds of injuries that people can develop. And stuff like this, like breaking a wrist, sometimes is like not even playing related, right? As musicians, we always think about like, oh, what are some of the ways that we can prevent injuries? Like you could be the most careful, the most conservative, like be doing all the right strengthening, stretching, etc. as possible. And then you could be on tour one day, slip on a patch of ice, and then your tour is over like in a heartbeat, right? And so, it's one of those things that even with the most careful planning, like stuff like this, life just happens and kind of gets in the way. So, my approach, especially with broken bones, and this is something that I tell people all the time, is like, look, I am probably it kind of goes against what most people think. Okay, I'm going to go see a doctor or I'm going to go see Janice who works with musicians. She's just going to tell me not to play, right? Any kind of injury, she's not going to tell me not to play.
Right.
Which is actually for me like the furthest thing from the truth because I will do everything I humanly can to keep any musician playing at some capacity. It might not be the way that might not be like they're going to go out and perform, but let's keep your chops up. Let's keep your muscle memory in there as
Right.
best as we can. However, when it comes to fractures like what you went through, it's one of those situations like, hey, look, it's temporary. Most people will heal anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks, average 6 weeks. The We really need to respect that process and let the bone do its thing, right? And in those cases, that's a hard no. Like, do not pass go. Just just let it do its thing. Because if
Mm,
you interfere with that process, then it's just gonna set you back. If
yeah.
you start putting stress through the bone that's trying to heal and trying to remodel, it could heal crooked or it could not heal at all. Like those are the risks of that. And so would you like, do you wanna do you wanna have that small payout and then have long-term consequences? Or are you gonna just, let your body do what it needs to do, what it does best,
Yeah.
heal, and then we can, work through some of the things that kind of come afterwards. Like, okay, maybe your wrist is stiff, maybe you have less strength because you were in a cast for a month or 2 months.
Yeah.
There are consequences and consequences are one of those words that usually gets a bad kind of connotation behind it, but really consequence is just the result of something, right? So
Right.
there could be good consequences and there could be bad consequences.
Right.
So you kind of have to do a pro cons list to
Yeah.
see
And I
what's
think,
going to be worthwhile.
yeah. So let's talk about the emotional part for a moment. In
Yeah.
in my case, the thought of not being able to play again when that was my thing, I was already, like I said, a professional player, getting
Yeah.
paid. I had
Yeah.
been playing 9 years,
Yeah.
and, at that time, just for context, there was no YouTube, Facebook, or any rabbit hole to fall down like that.
Oh
There
man. But
there
even
was
those rabbit holes are not great rabbit holes to fall
right.
down either.
But I mean, even on the good side, I couldn't just throw on a
No,
nature
I know what you
channel,
mean. Yeah.
yeah, that was
Yeah, I
funny
know
though,
what you mean.
because it's true. But there was also no Netflix or Disney or Amazon. I don't even remember if we had a VCR yet. This is 1981. I don't even remember. And so one day I was just kind of moping around the house, and my mother said, she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, I went like this, and I'm like, I'm just, she says, "Why don't you go play your drums?" And I looked at her like, first of all, did she say what I think she said? And
Yeah.
does she not understand that I have this full cast? And I said, "Mom," and I held up my hand, and she says, "Use your feet, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "So just play with one hand." And like that never occurred to me. So being a
Yeah.
right-handed drummer, I started playing to some of my favorite music at first without using this arm at all. It was in a sling,
Yeah.
but I played with my left hand on the hi-hat and the snare like an open-handed player would, and it really helped. This was 9, 10 weeks. It really helped me
Yeah.
develop. I'm ambidextrous before, but it really helped me. And then when I had the half cast on, I admit I did cheat a little bit, and I would kind of rigidly hold a stick and just tap a little bit while those hands doing, all the work. And that really, really helped I guess emotional well-being, because I felt like, well, I'm doing something.
Yeah.
It really made a difference. So the point there is to think outside the box. No matter what you play, no matter what your injury is, other than falling down a YouTube rabbit hole, your favorite concerts, or some instructional stuff or something, keep your chops up somehow,
Yeah.
even for
Yeah.
the sake of up here.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the mental portion is oftentimes the harder thing to overcome than it is like kind of like the physical healing because musicians are such creative people and this is like human nature in general, but there's nothing scarier and more stressful. Well, there are many things, but in general, like if you do, the unknown portion is really
That's the
what
scary
gets
part, I think.
people scared, right?
Yeah.
And kind of builds the anxiety, etc. Especially when you have unhelpful medical professionals sitting there and telling you, "Hey, you're a musician. You'll never be able to
Oh,
play again.
yeah.
You'll never be able to do this. Why don't you just switch instruments?" I had physicians tell patients of mine, "Why don't you just when can you break? When is your off season?" There's no off season for musicians, right?
Right,
I
right.
had I had doctors tell me that I would never play the violin again, when I was
Wow.
dealing with my injury, and I'm like, "Well, I don't know if that is true,"
It sounds
and
outlandish.
it's very extreme, right? And it just
Yeah.
kinda goes to show that, and kinda like what you're saying, there's, many ways of still being able to play. Maybe it doesn't look exactly the way that you were doing it before.
Yeah.
Maybe there may have to be modifications, but it's almost never that absolute, where you're never gonna play again.
Right.
Even if you had your arm amputated, there are many ways that
Oh,
people can
yeah.
still play, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
right? So I don't know, that just gets me on a whole 'nother soapbox of,
Yeah, because there's no
um
reason for it to begin with. Even let's just say it was true for a moment. There's no reason at the outset to even put someone in that mindset,
well,
you know?
especially when it's so fresh. Maybe you just fell and you're in the ER or urgent care, 2 hours later.
Right.
And for someone to say that so fresh out, and you're already going through a lot of stress because of the injury itself, and then for someone to lay that on you from day 0
Yeah.
is, in my mind, so harmful because it sets the expectation of what your future is gonna look like, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so, I don't know, I have a really big issue when I hear musicians come in and tell me that, "Oh, my doctor said such and such," and it's just like I was saying earlier, I do everything in my power to keep musicians playing in some capacity because I know what it's like to have someone tell me that I would never play again. And
Yeah.
it's the most frustrating and the scariest thing because at that point, I was also working professionally too, and, well, shoot, I spent my entire life since I was 4 training up to get to this level and to play at this level to be able to start having these gigs and stuff. And then for someone who doesn't do any of that to tell me that I can't do it anymore,
Yeah.
they're not thinking outside the box, or they're not their mindset is just very closed. Um
Yeah,
and
exactly.
maybe in some scenarios that statement where they wouldn't be able to play again may be true, but very, 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 very few and far between in my perspective.
Yeah.
Especially as someone who deals with people who are in you're like 95% of my patients are musicians. So the population that I deal with, if everyone who came through my doors had the expectation that they would never play again, I wouldn't have any patients, right? Like people come to get better so that they can go back on the road or they can go back and play.
Right.
And again, it might look different, it might be the same, but that's for us to discover and find out.
Yeah. I want to ask the audience. Well, I see a couple comments. So I see that Kaz Yoshida is chiming in again. Hey, Kaz, thanks for following what we do here from Japan, Yokohama. Been to Japan, not Yokohama, though. That's awesome. And we've also got Al Gardiner watching from Haida, Gwaii, British Columbia, Canada. Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much. I want to ask the audience whether you're watching live or eventually seeing this on the archive on any of our channels. If you've had a recent major injury and you're a drummer or other musician, chime in with how did it happen? What is it? And where are you in that process? And lastly, and maybe most importantly, cheer up and be positive about it because there is always a other side. I have spoken to people over the years that have had everything from a cage put in over some of their vertebrae to, major surgery to like me breaking some bones, stuff like that. And they're kind of, in a way, they're fun and inspirational stories to hear when you hear someone say, yeah, now I'm playing again. no matter
Yeah.
what it is. I've known guitar players that have had to change how they played because of arthritis, or maybe they're older, they just don't have the mobility, different things
Right.
like that.
Right.
So I encourage people to share their stories. But if all major injuries aside, if you just have questions, you think you might be experiencing nerve pain, carpal tunnel tendonitis, arthritis, uh, pain up here, especially if you're a drummer or maybe even a heavy strapped bass player, guitar player, cello, anything. We get in these postures, right? No matter what
Right.
instrument
Right.
we play. And then there's the repetitive motion. And for drummers, we've talked about this over and over. Sometimes maybe your setup isn't ergonomically fair for your body type and how you play. There's adjustments you can make. So I don't want anyone to ever be shy about asking questions for Janice to address in any of those areas.
Yeah.
We're always happy to take questions. But while we're waiting to see if anyone asks questions or comments, Janice, you mentioned right before we went live um, that you've noticed sort of a spike, if you will, in wrist injuries. What's going on? Is it the month of August? Was it the meteor
I don't
shower
know.
recently? What's going on?
Who knows? Who knows? It's like
This summer and
it
people
was
are just
it was
more
a full
reckless?
yeah, no. It was just happens. Like things usually come in waves and I have no idea why, but yeah, I recently not this month, but recently had a handful of people who fell and broke their wrists and
Wow.
for different reasons. It was like really coincidental, but I thought it was like kind of amusing at the same time because it was like they kind of come and go. But, the main thing, like I was saying, is, these people need to get back on tour. And I think one of the people who I saw, they call me like the day after they had broke their wrist. And they're like, well, when I have this tour coming up in the summer, can I go on the tour? I was like, okay, hold up. Like, let your wrist is in like 4 pieces. Let's try
Oh,
and get it back
wow.
to 1, and then
Oh,
let's talk about that.
4
Um,
pieces. How did they break it?
they slipped on some ice, so,
Wow.
yeah, it was a freak accident. It wasn't anything that they were doing, like, reckless or
Yeah.
anything of the sort. So, I had someone else who, like, tripped up some stairs. So,
Oh, boy.
um yeah, I mean, I've done that before, but not broken my wrist, but,
Yeah, me too. Oh, I have slipped, fallen, and been pushed down the stairs many times. I thankfully never broke anything.
yeah, yeah. So, it like my priority whenever I get someone who has a fracture, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a bone or a wrist or whatever. It's like, okay, like I was saying earlier, let's let the bone heal. Let's get some more x-rays. Maybe I don't see you very often like those first few weeks because really there's not much for us to do. The number one
Yeah.
priority is making sure that things heal. Maybe you check in, maybe we do like a virtual consultation just to kind of check in, answer any questions that you have, maybe brainstorm things that you can modify to like, still do things like similar to what you said, like you had your like people forget oftentimes when they have an injury that like they have the rest of their body is usually quite
Right.
healthy, right?
Yeah.
And so I've had pianists who like have shoulder surgery. They can't move but they can do a lot of like, there's a lot of, like, one-handed repertoire out there that they can work on, or I've had composers where they've, like, one arm got out of commission, and someone even said to me once, like, "Wow, like, this completely changed the way that I thought about composing."
Oh,
Um,
their approach.
because
Yeah.
in their approach and, like, they were able to just create more kind of like more robust sounds that they never really tried to explore because they didn't have those limitations. So they just kind of carried on composing or, arranging the ways that they had been like for all
Status
of
quo.
time. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you take one arm away and they're like, wow, like this just like completely opened everything up for me. I was like, you know, good things happen sometimes. Like, it's a crappy situation to be in, being injured and not being able to play, but maybe there's something good that can come of it, or maybe like something where you haven't approached it one way.
Right.
So, There's also other techniques that you can use, such as like mental practicing, etc., where your brain can still learn or still kind of like map out the strategies that you potentially would use if you were playing physically in front of an instrument. And there's a lot of value in how brains kind of learn new skill, even if you're not sitting in front of an actual kit or your instrument.
Yeah. And, in my situation, thinking back, again, 1981, I don't watch regular TV, so I don't see a lot of commercials. I see some commercials on YouTube from time to time, but back then there was a campaign where milk builds a body strong.
Oh,
And
I
I was
love
always
those commercials.
I was always a big milk drinker. So when I broke my wrist, I like tripled my milk consumption thinking,
Oh, that's
I'm gonna
good.
beat this thing. Yeah. And
Yeah.
even the doctor, because he said you'll probably need screws for the
Yeah.
radius, hold the bone together.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't need anything. And even he
Great.
said maybe drinking all that milk and everything. And I found out later in life that because of a hypoparathyroid, my body produces extra calcium as well. So
Got
maybe
it.
that factored into it. I don't know. But
Who knows? You're
at
also really young too, so,
the
you
time,
had
that's
you had
true.
age
Yeah.
on your side.
Oh, if that happened now, yeah, who knows, right? The same injury at 61 might not
No,
fare
that's
as
still
well.
young. That's still young.
Okay, good, good. Yeah, because
Yeah,
I was
I mean,
18 when it happened.
yeah, it's like when I had a shoulder surgery, on my left side when I was in college. I was a music major at the time, and I was pulling double duty as a piano major and, like, also on scholarship for violin. And so violin was the instrument that, kind of caused all my injuries, but I ended up having to get shoulder surgery because, like, no one could figure out what to do. And
Mhm.
so the last resort, we had put it off, put it off, put it off, and then, like, finally, my shoulder gave out on me one day, and I was like, "I'm out of options. I can't play longer than, like, 10 minutes without pain.
Oh, wow.
I don't know what else to do, and so let's just go and get the surgery." And so,
Ugh,
I got the surgery, but then I was out of commission for, like, a whole semester and then some, but not just on the violin, also on the piano. So
yeah.
I also had to kind of learn. I remember I would go to the practice room sometimes and just, like, sit there in my sling and just, like, play, like, 1 octave scales, like, just to
Yeah.
kinda get some kind of movement in my arm, and just trying to keep my chops up somehow because I knew I had performances, like, the next semester that were, like, on the books already.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Crazy.
that process, again, the unknown is probably the scariest part.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to, and I'm a big advocate for this, is like, even if you're healthy now, find your team of people. Find your team of healthcare providers. Take the time and do the research, so that if and when something happens to you, you're not just kind of going to whoever happens to be on call that day, right?
Right.
You're not at the mercy of some random stranger, that you actually have people who you know and you trust and who can kind of give you the rundown of, like, okay, this is what it's gonna be, like, this is the reality of it, and these are
Yeah.
the ways that you can kind of problem solve, knowing because they know you and know that this is what you need to do. Then they could have a little bit more context to kind of set those goals and, like, be working towards getting that back.
Right. And also someone who doesn't make you feel like you're just on a conveyor belt so they can get to the next,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
I think that's
important.
super important, and I think especially as for people who do very specific things at a high level, such as musicians or athletes, etcetera, it's even more important because your career is on the line, right?
Mm.
Like, if you're injured, you broke your wrist, if it was a freak accident, you broke your wrist, or even if you're dealing with some kind of, like, overuse injury, like, you know, you you could probably suck it up and deal with it and put on a show, but at what cost? You're gonna feel
Yeah.
like crap, for, like, a week, another month, but
Right.
that's not feasible for someone who has to play, like, 4 or 5 shows a week, um, you know, rinse, recycle, repeat.
Exactly.
Um, so I would encourage anyone to find a good team of people, PT included, if you can.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um
yeah, that's true. It's the after the major, or what would, like the first stage of treatment be called other than triage, where then they need to, over more time, visit you, get physical therapy and go through all what's in between triage and you, for instance?
Um, well, it depends on the injury.
Yeah,
So
that's
sometimes let's talk about a wrist fracture, for example, right?
okay.
Since we're kind of talking about that. So you fall down, your wrist really hurts, you think you broke it, or it's like crooked and you're like, oh, it's definitely broken. And so you go and get your x-rays. Sometimes people will get surgery, sometimes not. The orthopedic surgeon who you probably would see in either scenario, whether it's broken or whatever, they would probably, kind of give you the timeline, or hopefully they should give you the timeline.
Realistic,
Um,
hopefully, yeah, and not the
real,
doom comment, "You'll never play again," or "Write with
right,
that hand." Save
right.
that.
I mean, if in an ideal situation, I know everyone's situation is different because of like insurances and whatnot, but um, usually what a doctor would say, if you broke your wrist, the doctor would be like, okay, let's wait and do another set of x-rays before you go and see a PT.
Mm,
Usually that's the course of care.
good.
Which is fine because like I said earlier, there's probably not a lot that I can do in the meantime while we wait for your wrist to heal. Now, I'll say that over the last 15 years since I've been a PT, how we approach treating fractures or kind of the rehab for fractures has changed a decent amount.
Yeah.
And so they're really more about like early movement, more so than, stick you in a full arm cast for
Right.
6 to 8 weeks. Like casts aren't very common these days. Usually you'll see
Wow.
people wearing just a regular wrist splint, like those
Yeah.
Velcro ones that you see, people can slip on and off.
Yes.
And we get them moving a lot earlier. And the reason why that is because there's been a number of studies that have shown that um, compared to straight immobilization or straight casting,
Yeah.
um, early movement didn't have more negative effects
Mm.
compared to casting, meaning that
Wow.
there weren't it wasn't worse when you got people moving early under guided supervision. It's not to say that you should just like go and take your wrist out and like do
Yeah,
it without anyone
and
like
start
giving you
playing. Yeah.
specific guidelines.
Yeah.
But so that's the reason why. And so, I'll start to see people probably like 3 weeks or so after their break. But again, I set very clear guidelines and rules about like what they can and can't do, how much they can and can't lift. The doctor should also do that, like usually no lifting no more than like 2 pounds. Um, and so in the early days, even if the doctor is super conservative, like no PT for the first 6 weeks, I still would recommend that they touch base with a PT.
Mm.
Um, because oftentimes doctors don't have a lot of time to educate the patient about you should do this, you should do that. Like, oh, what about this situation? What about that situation? They're like, let's see you for 5 minutes. Yep, it's broken. Okay, let's put you in a cast. I'll see you in 6 weeks.
Get you
Have a
out.
great day.
Right.
So I think the role or the value that a PT could really come into play is kind of answering or helping people troubleshoot kind of that unknown thing because most people would never have navigated like being one-handed like
Right.
most times in their life. So, even if it just is just kind of like a virtual situation like that, at least you can touch base with someone, get
Yeah.
to know them, see if you trust them. And then that way, when you're ready to rock and you get that cast off and you get the green light, and the doctor's like, okay, great, start moving, get that flexibility back, get that strength back. You already have someone that you know and you trust that isn't gonna like
I
either
love
hold you back or be too aggressive
it.
or anything like that because you've already felt it out.
Yeah. Sometimes, honestly, all things being equal, it can come down to personalities and just who do you gel with better, because
Totally,
that'll be
totally.
motivating if, I'm
Yep.
sure people that work with you, that's a big part. They work with you because there's that rapport and therefore they
Right,
trust you more. You're
right.
inspirational, motivational that way. It's a big part of it.
It's a huge part of it too. I
Yeah.
mean, because, like, not just with these acute injuries, let's say, like, a overuse injury, right?
Yeah.
Like, how many times have I heard someone be like, "Oh, yeah, I went to PT." I was like, "Okay, well, are you like, what did you work on? Are you still, like, doing some of the exercises?" And you're like, I never really, like, did it." But if they're motivated and, like, the person who they're working with is collaborating with them and the patient is being like, "Okay, this is gonna help me achieve this goal." Like,
Right.
I'm working towards going back on the road and playing, 4 shows a night or 4 shows no, that'd be crazy. 4 shows a week. Um, um, these are the steps that I need to take, and these are how I need to keep myself healthy after I'm better, right?
Right.
And so they're a little bit more invested in that. So, which
That's
in the
interesting.
long run will be helpful as
In closing, I have a question for you. What
yeah.
is that you can remember? What's the most acute injury you treated that was related to playing an instrument? And what was the instrument?
The most acute?
Yeah, was there
I
like
mean,
a really bad case of carpal tunnel that was different from what you've seen,
y
or tendonitis, bursitis, anything like that?
sure. I mean, I guess, any kind of nerve-related injury, I that happens quite often.
Yeah,
Sometimes when people are preparing for, like, competitions or auditions or
they'll
stuff like
overdo it.
that, where they have, like, a deadline, like, and they have to prepare a ton of stuff, right, leading up to it, then I might see really acute tendonitis, where it's, like, actively inflamed and puffy and hot and, like, really irritated. Most of the time when I see kinda overuse injuries, it's kinda, like, been going on for a while, and so kinda that acute, like, fire isn't
Yeah,
there as much anymore. But when we're dealing with, like, really acute injuries, really you have to let that inflammation calm down as best as you can.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's nerve pain is also one of those things. I had someone who was, like, sitting for a really long time and then he, like, blew out his back,
Oh,
had, like, really bad pain going all the way down to his, like, foot, his toe, and, like,
was
it
that
was
due to loss of strength because of too much sitting, like muscle fatigue, and therefore maybe didn't have the support or strength that
well,
typically it would, and stood up and there goes the back?
It the person like, I've seen a few of these, but, the one that kinda comes to mind was actually not something where it was, like, just weakness, like, they had just started, like, a new weightlifting routine,
Mhm.
and not to say that weightlifting is bad in any sense, but they had just kinda, like, jumped into it without kinda, like, building up to it, and so they maybe, like, their form was not quite the right way, or maybe the weight was too much for their body to handle, and so, like, when they went to pick something up, like, the disc just blew. So,
Oh, wow.
um, it's one of those things, again, not music related. They were probably looking to, like, try and, just get healthier so that it would help their playing down the line,
Right.
but maybe their approach to it was, like, starting at 1 or 2 notches a little bit beyond what their actual physical capabilities were, and so that's kinda where that mismatch probably happened. But yeah, that was that w the one that I'm thinking of was, that was is a very acute case, and so we spent quite some
Wow.
time trying to just get it down, and, you know, the person couldn't even, like, sit up straight for more than, like, 5 minutes at a time.
Wow.
Um,
Ouch.
so, yeah, acute injuries are really hard because you really have to, like, manage it. Once you
Yeah.
get into the chronic overuse stuff, then it's like you have a little bit more leeway to play around with. Not that it's better, but
Right.
but it's not better by any means, but, you're kind of not dealing with, like, an emergent situation or,
Yeah.
um, you know, trying to put out fires in that way.
Great. Well, thanks again for some more wonderful wisdom about, health as a
Yeah.
musician and just taking care of ourselves when we get a more acute injury rather than something acquired slowly over time. And folks, if you're not familiar with this original Drum Talk TV series, Janice and I do this every month, and you're always welcome to chime in with questions about any repetitive motion related injury or anything else. And if you're not sure whether or not you have an injury, if something weird or different is going on, you can ask questions on the show, And there's also Janice's channels where you can follow her in the post wherever you're watching this. And we encourage you to tune in.
That's right. Yeah,
Great.
I
Thanks,
always love
Janice.
these conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. It's always, I always learn a lot too, even though I've been around the bend a few times.
Nice.
I'm hoping our viewers do too. I'm sure they are if they're paying attention. So, folks, take advantage. There's a whole playlist of this stuff on whatever channel you're watching us on, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or Vimeo. So, check it out. And Janice, hang on the line with me. And, folks, we will see you again on this show next month. And there's plenty of Drum Talk TV craziness in between. Thanks, everybody.